The Galactic Alliance had a peculiar talent for discovering planets that seemed specifically designed to murder anyone foolish enough to land on them. Crevasse 9 was a masterpiece in this regard, a world so aggressively hostile that the initial survey team's report read less like scientific documentation and more like a suicide note written by someone with a dark sense of humor. The planet sat in a strategically valuable position near 3 major jump points, squatting on top of rare mineral deposits, like a dragon on a pile of gold. Unfortunately, that dragon had gravitational mood swings, atmospheric tantrums that made Category 5 hurricanes look like pleasant breezes, and a tectonic system that rearranged itself with the frequency of a bored interior decorator. The survey team's official assessment concluded with a single word in bold: uninhabitable. Someone had added beneath it in handwriting, "Seriously, don't even try." The gravitational anomalies were the first problem. Crevasse 9 orbited a binary star system in a figure-8 pattern that should have been mathematically impossible, but apparently nobody had informed the planet about basic orbital mechanics. This meant gravity fluctuated between 0.8 and 1.4 standard throughout its rotation, creating stress patterns that could turn solid structures into abstract art. Then there were the hypercanes, atmospheric phenomena that occurred when normal hurricanes looked in the mirror and decided they weren't trying hard enough. Wind speeds reached 600 kilometers per hour during peak season, which lasted approximately 9 months of the local year. And if the wind didn't get you, the earthquakes would. The planet's crust was thin, fractured, and apparently held together by sheer spite. Seismic events, measuring 6.0 or higher, occurred weekly. The larger ones could open chasms that swallowed buildings whole, assuming you'd been optimistic enough to construct buildings in the first place. Yet here stood the Alliance, staring at their strategic maps and contemplating what level of insanity would be required to establish a forward base on this nightmare world. The answer, as it turned out, was military-grade insanity with a human consultant. Commander Vex'thor stood on the bridge of the survey vessel, all 4 of his arms crossed in what could only be described as aggressively unimpressed. The Calthian had evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world, which meant they were built like ambulatory tanks and had the temperament to match. Vex'thor had spent 40 years in military engineering, establishing bases on hostile worlds, and his professional opinion could be summarized as absolutely not. "The prefab shelters will collapse within the first gravitational flux," he said, pointing one clawed hand at the holographic display. "Force field technology requires consistent power generation, which these seismic activities will disrupt. Molecular bonding structures are rigid, excellent for stable environments, catastrophic here. They'll shatter like glass during the first hypercane." His secondary arms gestured at the atmospheric data. "I've built fortifications on volcanic worlds, ice planets with temperatures that freeze methane, and one memorable hellscape where the atmosphere was mildly acidic. This," he jabbed at Crevasse 9's rotating image, "this is nature telling us to go away, loudly, with violence." The Calthian's decorated military vest clinked as he turned to face the assembled team. "I've reviewed 17 different construction methodologies. The math is consistent. No shelter can stand here for more than 6 months. Anything we build will kill the people inside it when it fails. I cannot, in good conscience or bad, recommend establishing a base on this world." There was a long silence. Then someone in the back raised their hand. "Yes?" Vex'thor's tone suggested he already regretted acknowledging the gesture. "What if we tried wood?" The speaker was human, which explained approximately 60% of the statement's audacity. Marcus Webb stood at the back of the briefing room, looking exactly like someone who'd just suggested fighting a star destroyer with a pointed stick. He was average height for a human, which made him short by most species standards, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his life squinting at things that were about to break. "Wood," Vex'thor repeated, in the same tone one might use for ritual suicide or interpretive dance. "Timber construction," Marcus clarified, stepping forward, specifically using those. He pulled up images of the indigenous megatrees that dotted Crevasse 9's landscape. They were enormous, 100-meter giants with trunk diameters that could swallow a shuttle. More importantly, they were already dead, knocked down by previous storms into convenient piles of building material. The room erupted in murmurs. A Phylaxian engineer chittered something that the translator rendered as is, this human experiencing a medical emergency. Marcus continued, undeterred by the collective skepticism radiating from every species present. "I'm from the North American tornado belt, grew up in a family that ran a lumber operation. My graduate thesis was on flexible structural engineering for extreme weather environments. Wood isn't just dead trees, it's a composite material with incredible tensile strength, natural flexibility, and a strength-to-weight ratio that most of your fancy alloys would envy. It's primitive," someone objected. "It's proven," Marcus countered. "Humans have been building with timber for thousands of years across every hostile environment our planet offered. Hurricanes, earthquakes, floods. We figured out how to make wood work through all of it. Your molecular bonding structures are rigid because they're designed for stable environments. They don't flex, they don't absorb energy, they just stand there until the physics get too rough. And then they snap. Wood bends. Wood yields. Wood survives." Vex'thor's 4 eyes narrowed. "You're volunteering for this assignment?" "Yes, sir. You understand this is likely fatal. I've read the reports, and you believe you can build a structure that will withstand conditions I've just explained, will destroy any known construction methodology." Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd made worse decisions and survived them. "Commander, with respect, you've never built with wood on a world that's trying to kill you." "I have." "Well, metaphorically, Earth doesn't try quite this hard, but the principle's the same." The Calthian studied him for a long moment. Then all 4 arms uncrossed. "I'm assigning you a support team and giving you 72 hours to prove your concept. When your structure fails, and it will fail, we evacuate immediately and write this planet off as unusable." "Clear, Crystal." "Excellent. Try not to die immediately. The paperwork is tedious." Crevasse 9's surface was worse than the scans had suggested, which seemed cosmically unfair given how terrible the scans had made it look. The landing team touched down during what the weather models optimistically called a calm period, which still involved 30-km/h winds and gravity at 1.2 standard. Marcus stepped off the shuttle and immediately understood why Vex'thor had been so pessimistic. The ground wasn't stable, it thrummed with constant minor tremors, like standing on the deck of a ship in rough seas. The air smelled of ozone and something organic that had died recently. In the distance, one of the megatrees toppled over with a groan that echoed across the plains, defeated by wind and time. "Cheerful place," muttered Renix, a Vothari technician whose species had evolved from aquatic ambush predators. His translator gave his words a gurgling quality. "I give it 10 minutes before something tries to kill us." "Optimist," replied Corvesh, a crystalline silicate engineer who communicated through light pulses translated into speech. "I'm timing first injury at 7 minutes." Marcus ignored them and approached the fallen megatrees. The wood was dense, incredibly so. His scanner indicated cellular structure compressed by the high gravity fluctuations. The grain was tight, growth rings packed together like geological strata. He ran calculations in his head, cross-referencing with earth woods. Approximate tensile strength, comparable to white oak, but with greater density. The natural oils in the wood had protected it from rot, despite the humid atmosphere. "This'll work," he said aloud. "What'll work?" Vex'thor had followed him, apparently determined to witness the human's failure firsthand. "Your plan is to stack logs, like some sort of pre-industrial settlement. Not stack, interlock." Marcus pulled up his tablet, sketching quickly. "Traditional dovetail joinery, modified for the stress patterns here. We'll cut notches that let the logs nest together. No nails, no rigid fasteners. The weight of the structure holds itself together, but each log can move independently within tolerances. When the gravity shifts or the ground shakes, the building flexes as a whole instead of developing stress fractures." He zoomed in on the foundation design. "We'll anchor into bedrock with deep piers, stone and compacted rubble, not metal that'll fatigue. The whole structure sits on these piers with minimal rigid connection. Think of it like a boat floating on rough water instead of a bridge bolted to unstable ground." Vex'thor's expression was unreadable, which for a Calthian meant deep skepticism. "And when the hypercanes arrive, aerodynamic profile, low center of gravity, and strategic mass distribution. We're not building tall, we're building dense and squat. The wind will flow over and around instead of catching surfaces. Plus, the sheer weight of these logs means we're talking about a structure massing hundreds of tons. That's a lot of inertia to overcome. You're insane, maybe, but I'm insane with a plan, which is better than sane without one." The Calthian commander waved two arms in dismissal. 72 hours. Prove it or we leave." Marcus began work with the kind of focused intensity that made his support team nervous. He'd brought cutting equipment, plasma saws that could slice through the megatree trunks with precision, and a small crew of very confused aliens who'd signed up for advanced engineering, not whatever primitive ritual they were now witnessing. The first log took 4 hours to cut, shape, and position. Marcus measured twice, cut once, and explained his process to exactly nobody because he was too busy doing the mental math required to make this work. The logs were massive. Each one weighed several tons and required the shuttle's cargo lifters to move. He marked cut points with laser precision, creating interlocking notches that looked simple but required calculating load distribution, flex tolerances, and structural dynamics. "He's building a cabin," Rainix observed, watching Marcus guide another log into position. "An actual, honest-to-entropy cabin, like something from human historical archives. A cabin that weighs more than our shuttle," Corvesh added. The silicate engineer had taken to following Marcus around with a scanner, recording everything. "The structural mathematics are interesting. Primitive techniques applied with sophisticated understanding." By the end of day 1, Marcus had completed the foundation and first wall section. It didn't look like much. Rough-hewn logs stacked in a rectangular formation, anchored to bedrock piers. But when Rainix pressed against it experimentally, the structure didn't budge. The logs were locked together through nothing but clever geometry and gravitational force. Vex'thor inspected it that evening, walking around the nascent structure with professional scrutiny. "It won't survive," he said finally, "but it's more than I expected after one day." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Marcus replied, not looking up from his calculations for tomorrow's work. "That wasn't confidence. That was surprise you haven't been crushed yet." That night, Marcus slept in the shuttle, while his team placed bets on failure modes. The running favorite was catastrophic structural collapse during the next tremor, paying out at 3-to-1 odds. The next morning, Crevasse 9 decided to test the humans' work ahead of schedule. The storm alert came at 0600 local time, a Class 3 hypercane forming rapidly in the northern hemisphere and tracking directly toward their landing site. Estimated wind speeds 450 kilometers per hour with gusts to 550. Evacuation, Vex'thor ordered immediately. Everyone to the shuttle, we're lifting to orbital shelter. The team scrambled, packing equipment with the efficient panic of people who'd trained for exactly this scenario. Marcus was still standing next to his half-built structure, staring at the darkening sky. That means you human, Vex'thor called. Whatever point you're trying to prove isn't worth dying for. It's not finished, Marcus said. He'd completed 3 walls and part of the roof structure, enough to be functional, not enough to be secure. I need another day. You need to not be pulverized by 500-kilometer winds. Move. The structure will hold. The structure is incomplete. It has gaps in the roof. The wind will get inside, create internal pressure, and tear it apart from within. The Calthian was shouting now, which his species only did when extremely stressed or about to enter combat. I am not filing a death report because you're too stubborn to evacuate. Marcus looked at his half-built cabin, then at the approaching storm, then back at Vex'thor. Something in his expression suggested he was doing math that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with acceptable risk levels. 72 hours, he said quietly. You gave me 72 hours to prove the concept. This storm proves it one way or another, by killing you, or by demonstrating that flexible timber construction can survive extreme weather events that would destroy conventional structures. Marcus smiled that same reckless smile from the briefing. Besides, I've reinforced the core structure, added cross-bracing. The gaps in the roof actually help, less surface for wind to catch, natural pressure equalization. It's not pretty, but the math works. Vex'thor stared at him. Then, with all 4 arms, the commander grabbed Marcus by the shoulders and physically lifted him toward the shuttle. Absolutely not. I don't care about your math. I don't care about your timber. I care about not explaining to Alliance Command why I left a human to die in a storm that could flip our shuttle. They compromised. Marcus would evacuate to the shuttle, which would move to minimum safe distance, 10 kilometers away, hovering at 500 meters altitude with full shields active. Sensors would monitor the structure. When it failed, they'd have visual confirmation and could write off the entire timber construction concept as a noble but doomed experiment. The Hypercane arrived with the subtlety of an invasion fleet. The sky turned the color of a bruise, clouds rotating in a spiral that stretched from horizon to horizon. The wind built gradually, then suddenly, going from concerning to terrifying in the span of 10 minutes. The shuttle shook despite its shields and thrusters fighting to maintain position. Inside, the crew watched their monitor feeds in silence. The half-built cabin sat in the center of their primary camera view, looking absurdly small against the approaching maelstrom. The megatrees around it bent nearly horizontal, their massive trunks yielding to forces that would have snapped structural steel. Wind speed 380 and rising, Renix reported. Gravity fluctuation beginning, currently at 1.3 standard and climbing. The structure is shifting, Corvesh observed. On the monitor, the logs were visibly moving, the entire cabin flexing as wind and gravity pulled in different directions. Individual components are separating by millimeters. It's falling apart, someone said. No, Marcus replied, leaning forward. It's adapting. He was right. The logs were moving, but they weren't separating. They were shifting within their interlocked notches, each piece adjusting to the stress while maintaining overall structural integrity. The whole building swayed, a barely perceptible rhythm that seemed impossible for something massing hundreds of tons. The wind hit 450 kilometers per hour. A monitor showed a mega tree trunk, easily 20 tons of wood, tumbling past the cabin like a rolling pin. It missed by meters. The cabin kept standing. Gravity spike, Renix announced. 1.4 standard. Seismic activity increasing, looks like a 4.5 tremor. Now the ground was shaking too. The camera view vibrated, making the cabin blur. Somewhere in the distance, a chasm opened, swallowing a pile of fallen trees. The cabin's foundation piers flexed, bedrock anchors holding, while the structure above moved independently. Vex'thor watched in silence, all four eyes fixed on the monitor. His expression had progressed from skeptical to confused, to something approaching professional crisis. The storm raged for 3 hours. By the end, wind speeds had peaked at 520 kilometers per hour. Gravity had fluctuated wildly between 0.9 and 1.4 standard, and two separate seismic events had restructured the local terrain. The shuttle's shields had strained. Emergency power had kicked in twice. Corvesh had started praying to crystalline deities nobody else knew existed. And when the Hypercane finally passed, moving on to torture some other section of the planet, the cabin was still standing. Not undamaged. Several logs had shifted noticeably. One section of the incomplete roof had torn away, and there were new gaps in the walls. But the core structure was intact. Functional. Survivable. The shuttle landed. The team emerged cautiously, as if the cabin might suddenly explode out of spite. Marcus walked straight to his creation and began inspection, running hands over logs, checking notches, measuring displacement. 3 centimeters of lateral movement on the west wall, he announced. Foundation piers held perfectly. Roof damage was expected, given the incomplete state. Overall structural integrity at, I'd say, 85%. He looked up at Vex'thor. I can have the repairs done in 3 hours. The Calthian commander approached slowly, studying the cabin with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality had been recently adjusted without his consent. He placed one clawed hand on a log, pushing experimentally. The structure didn't budge. Explain, he said finally. All of it. How did this survive when my calculations proved it couldn't? Marcus grinned. Your calculations were based on rigid structures resisting force. This doesn't resist. It accepts and redistributes. Every log can move independently, but they're locked together by geometry and weight. When the wind hits, the building flexes as a whole unit. When gravity shifts, the foundation floats on its piers instead of fighting the stress. When the ground shakes, the structure absorbs the motion through micro-movements in every joint. He gestured at the massive logs. Plus, these things are dense enough that the wind can't generate sufficient force to overcome their inertia. You'd need sustained winds above 600 kilometers per hour, and even then, the aerodynamic profile helps. The building is essentially a big, heavy wedge that wind flows around. It's primitive, Vex'thor said, but his tone had changed from dismissive to wondering. It's proven, by several thousand years of human trial and error, and now by one Crevash 9 Hypercane. Marcus pulled out his tablet. I've got designs for 6 more structures, including a proper command center, storage facilities, and crew quarters. Give me 3 weeks and a full team. I'll give you a base that'll last decades. 3 weeks later, Forward base Krevash-9 looked like something from human pre-industrial history had collided with military necessity and produced offspring that confused everyone involved. The main compound consisted of 7 interconnected timber structures, each built from the native megatrees using Marcus's interlocking log methodology. Defensive walls made of stacked logs surrounded the perimeter, angled to deflect wind and absorb seismic shocks. Drainage channels carved into bedrock managed the flooding from Hypercane rainfall. Every building had flexible joints at critical stress points, allowing the entire structure to move during gravitational fluctuations without developing fractures. It looked rustic. It looked primitive. It looked like it had been built by frontier colonists with more determination than sense. It also worked perfectly. 2 more hypercanes had tested the compound during construction. Both times, the crew had sheltered inside the completed buildings while the shuttle evacuated to orbit. Both times, the structures had flexed, adapted, and survived with minimal damage. The repairs took hours instead of weeks. Vex'thor filed his report to Alliance Command with the enthusiasm of someone confessing to military incompetence. After extensive testing under extreme conditions, he wrote, "I must conclude that human timber construction methodologies are superior to Alliance standard prefabricated structures for high-stress environments. The human consultant's forward base, has survived conditions that destroyed our simulation models of conventional buildings." He paused, deleted several paragraphs of defensive justification, and continued, "Recommend implementing timber construction protocols for frontier worlds. Also recommend assigning the human to permanent advisory position because apparently we've been overthinking structural engineering for several centuries." The response from Alliance Command was brief. "Explain how logs beat molecular bonding." Vex'thor's reply was even briefer. "Come see for yourself." 3 months into operation, Forward Base Krevash-9 had earned an unofficial nickname among Alliance personnel, the log cabin that shouldn't exist. Scientists made pilgrimages to study it. Military engineers arrived with scanning equipment and left with existential questions about their training. A Phylaxian physicist spent 2 weeks measuring the structure's flex patterns during storms and published a paper titled "Primitive Techniques, Advanced Results," a study in engineered humility. Marcus stayed on as permanent base engineer, mostly because leaving would require training someone else in timber construction, and nobody else seemed capable of making logs defy physics with the same casual confidence. He expanded the compound, adding more buildings using techniques adapted from various Earth cultures, some Nordic, some Japanese, some African. Each design was tailored to handle specific Krevash-9 challenges while maintaining the core principle: flexibility over rigidity, adaptation over resistance. Vex'thor remained base commander, having developed what could only be described as grudging respect for human engineering. He kept one of the original logs from the first cabin in his office, mounted like a trophy, with a plaque reading, "I was wrong about wood." On quiet days when Krevash-9's weather permitted the luxury of calm, Marcus would stand on the compound walls and watch the megatrees sway in the wind. Somewhere out there, more trees were falling, creating stockpiles of building material for future expansion. The planet that couldn't be settled had been settled, the base that couldn't stand was standing, and the human who'd proposed the impossible solution was already sketching plans for the next structure, because apparently 3 months of success hadn't convinced him to stop tempting fate. "What are you building now?" Vex'thor asked, finding Marcus on the wall during one such calm period. "Thinking about a bridge," Marcus replied, gesturing toward a chasm that had opened during the last seismic event. "Suspension design, timber cables, should be able to handle the gravity fluctuations if I... No. I mean, yes. Obviously yes. Build your bridge. The Calthian sighed, a sound like gravel shifting. But stop asking permission. You've proven your point. At this stage, if you think logs can do it, they probably can. My professional opinion is now whatever the human says. Marcus smiled. That's a dangerous amount of trust. Less dangerous than doubting you, apparently. Vex'thor turned to leave, then paused. The Alliance is implementing your construction protocols on 14 frontier worlds. They're calling it the web methodology. You're going to be famous for teaching advanced civilizations how to stack logs properly. Could be worse. Could be famous for getting crushed by the first storm. There was a betting pool. You cost me significant credits. You bet against me. I bet against logs defeating physics. In my defense, it seemed reasonable at the time. After Vex'thor left, Marcus returned to his sketches. The bridge would need careful engineering, proper load calculations, stress analysis, flexibility tolerances. But the math would work. It always did, if you remembered that nature had spent billions of years solving structural problems and paid attention to the solutions. Below in the compound, Alliance personnel moved between timber buildings that looked like they belonged in a history museum but performed like cutting-edge technology. Smoke rose from heating systems. Water flowed through wooden aqueducts. The defensive walls stood against a planet that threw everything it had at them and lost. Crevasse 9 still tried to kill everything on its surface. It would never stop trying. The hypercanes would keep coming, the earthquakes would keep shaking, and the gravity would keep fluctuating because the planet simply didn't care about making life convenient. But now there were humans here, building fortresses from fallen trees, and apparently that made all the difference. The commander had said no shelter could stand here. He'd been absolutely right, by every conventional measure and established engineering principle. No shelter built using advanced materials and sophisticated methodologies could survive Crevasse 9's hostility. Good thing someone had brought wood instead.